Caleb is now comparing Kalen DeBoer, who many thought was perhaps the second best coach in the nation, to $7 haircut Butch Jones.
What the? What was he thinking?
Release the hounds.
The Dave Hooker Show.
Keep cool.
A presentation of OffTheHookSports.com.
Caleb, you set this up because I don't know what you're thinking. Comparing Kalen DeBoer and all his greatness and what he did to Washington and what he's surely going to do at Alabama, right? But you are comparing him to Butch Jones. Why?
I'm raising warning flags about comparing him to Butch Jones. And I'm not saying this, Jimmy, because I actually think there's a bit of an overreaction to Alabama struggling this year. It's his first year with the new offense, and there's more parity. There's a lot of reasons that they have 2 losses. However, the red flag to me was apparently an Alabama player said over the weekend that they now have these things called they have these TNT signs across the practice field. And the TNT signs stand for takes no talent. And the point of the matter is it takes no talent to avoid making basic mistakes. So it's kind of a reminder of don't make basic mistakes. Jimmy, am I being unfair by saying that's a very Butch Jones thing to do? That's like the turnover trash can?
Yeah, I think it's I think it borders on being silly. Yeah. I don't think you saw that when Saban was running that program. Things like that. Yeah. I did not know that. I do know that he stepped into a very difficult job. I read where somebody wrote that this was all Saban's fault because all DeBoer did was inherit the talent he left. To me, first of all, there is a lot of talent on that team. Second of all, weren't there like 40 players from Alabama that transferred?
Yes.
So to say that Saban wouldn't be any better than what DeBoer is, I don't buy that at all. Now, Saban did have some undisciplined teams. If you remember 2 years ago when Tennessee beat them, they had 17 penalties in that game. They had 15 penalties this past Saturday. So they were not always the most disciplined team. And a lot of their penalties were off of aggression, personal fouls, late hits, stuff like that. But I think DeBoer inherited one. It's very hard to replace a legend in any sport. And when I think about it, just off the top of my head, I can only remember one football coach who was a great coach that handed it off, and that coach did as good or better. And that was when Devaney at Nebraska handed it off to Osborne. And Osborne had a better run than Devaney had. So, but there are very few of them like that. So I think, one, it's tough. Secondly, the roster is would be much different if Saban had stayed there because he wouldn't have had 40 people to transfer. I doubt he'd have lost Caleb Downs to Ohio State and the wide receiver that went to Texas. So, but I think it's hard to do that your first year. And it's been a struggle. I think the transfer portal contributes to that because I think now it's harder to coach kids because if you jump on their butt about something, they might quit. Hey, I'm leaving. I'm out of here. We've already seen a lot of players who have already decided to accept their red shirt. They played 4 games, and they said, I'm out of here. I'm transferring. I'm going somewhere else. I think it makes it harder to be a disciplinarian, in particular in your first year. So I think DeBoer ultimately would be successful at Alabama, but not to the – he's not going to match what Saban did. So from that perspective, a lot of people look at him and say he's a failure. I think he's a hell of a coach. Not just Sioux Falls, but then he went to, was it Fresno State? And then Washington. And Michael Penix was not that good at Indiana. Of course, he had a lot of injuries. And he becomes a great player at Washington. I think DeBoer's a really good coach. He's in a tough situation.
I want to play this clip for you, Jimmy, that is a head scratcher. I think collectively we've been around football probably for over 100 years, but I've never seen anything quite like this. I'll remind you before we get to this clip, which will make you giggle, that Jimmy's appearance is brought to you by Varner Ford.
2024 Ford Maverick XLT all-wheel drive, $31,990. 23 Ford Expedition 4x4 Limited, $66,590. 2023 Ford F-150 XLT Super Crew 4x4, $47,995. Ray Varner.
All right, go ahead and pull this up if you can for us, Caleb. This is the quarterback draw, dive, whatever you want to call it, quarterback sneak here.
That was the worst spot in history, by the way, too. But,
yes.
Yeah.
For Alabama, and watch what the two players behind do. And this feels very Butch-like to me, which is why we wanted to play it for you. So here we go, Caleb.
Right here.
Okay. All right.
Is that so?
Yeah.
The question, did
They're
Kalen
going
DeBoer
Steph
coach-
Curry and Klay Thompson there, Jim. What's going on?
Yeah, Nate Oates put that play in. Yeah, I saw that.
Well, everybody survived on that fourth down, so.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a really good fake. I'm sure it just threw Tennessee off tremendously on that play. Yeah, I just a couple of guys goofing around. I do wonder, did the coaching staff actually tell them to carry out a fake like that?
Well, one of the coaches was asked about it, which
Yeah.
I would argue that Kalen DeBoer, and I'm all for media access, shouldn't make anybody available from this point forward, except for him. He should be the one voice. But one coach was asked about it, and he was like, well, everything that happens on the field, they were taught to do. Almost like he wanted to accept blame to take it off them, but I don't know why in the world they would do that. That just seems... I mean, why would you even teach that?
Yeah, because it has no impact, it has no effect. Yeah, I don't know. I've got to think those players acted on their own. You know, players, as you know, get together and do these celebrations that are planned, in particular in the NFL, but they also do it in college. So I'm just sure that's a couple of players that said, hey, if we got a fourth down quarterback sneak, we're going to fake like we're shooting a jump shot. I don't know. Or maybe they're big fans of LeBron James. Who knows?
So, Jimmy, but with all this, given the fact that DeBoer was behind the whole TNT thing on the practice field, apparently, how unfair am I to invoke Butch Jones at this point? Is it as bad as the silly stuff Butch Jones was doing at Tennessee yet?
No, not yet. No. Now, what'll happen is, and it caught up to Butch Jones, when you do some of this silly stuff and you go 12-0, that's okay. When you do it and you've lost 2 games to 2 teams from the state of Tennessee, and if you lose another game or 2, then all of a sudden that gets magnified a lot.
Yeah. Agreed.
And so we'll see what happens down the stretch. Alabama, I think, is going to lose another game. I'm having a hard time seeing that team on the table.
Yep. Click like the thumbs up button. Make sure you're subscribed. Jimmy, nice enough to join us. Brought to you by Varner Ford each and every Wednesday. Jimmy, the poll question that I just put up on our YouTube page, we would encourage people to check out, and that is this. What is more likely for Kalen DeBoer? Win a championship at Alabama or get fired in 4 years?
Probably fired in 4 years. And what'll happen is that, because it's harder now to win a championship when you add Texas, not so much Oklahoma, but when you add Texas to the equation. You got Georgia under Kirby Smart that's had the best football program in the last 5 years, right? 2 national championships, probably the best one-loss record over the last 5 years. So it's harder to win a championship. And if you don't win a championship in 4 years after replacing Saban, the fans are going to be all over him. He's going to probably say, I've had enough of this, like Bill Curry did, and bolt or get fired. So I would say in 4 years he will not be Alabama's coach.
Yeah, Jimmy, you bring up the harder to win a championship. How, and you know, this is why I would not have taken the Alabama job. And I know you talk about following legends. I've disagreed with that, but how much of this is Alabama fans not really being informed on the fact that it's just not really possible to replicate what Nick Saban did?
Oh, they don't care about that.
Yeah.
No, they don't. And most programs don't care about somebody followed a legend and didn't succeed and they got fired. You know, even if you go to basketball with Pat Summitt and Holly Worley got fired, and she won 3 SEC championships, and she made the Elite Eight 3 times, but that wasn't good enough because she wouldn't get to the Final Four. The standard that Saban left is championship level. And if you don't get there, maybe not national championship, but at least SEC championship, if you don't get there, the fans lose their patience quickly, and the administration may want to support them, but when the big boosters say, we're not giving you any more money, and oh, by the way, we got to pay players $23 million a year, or whatever that number is going to be, I think it's going to be really hard to keep. So I don't see a great future for him.
Jimmy, here's the other issue too, is there are a lot of leaders on that team that went to Alabama to be pushed by Nick Saban, and by everyone that I've spoken to, Kalen DeBoer is more of a player's coach, which in this day and age, I used to think of an insult. I don't anymore. I think Josh Heupel's a player's coach. I think you have to be that because of the reasons you mentioned that they'll transfer. But I would add this to the entire equation too that works against DeBoer replacing Saban, is that there wasn't as much of a need for NIL money as there is now because of the Saban discount. You go to him and you're going to make it to the NFL. So, Joanne, I think there are all kinds of issues across the board that just really make for a bad situation for Kalen DeBoer. I could easily see him going somewhere else and having success. I just don't see it happening in Alabama.
Did you say across DeBoer?
I did say across the board. I didn't mean to do that, but I was kind of proud of myself.
No, I think you said across the board. It just sounded too good to let go. Yeah, I could see that. I could see him leaving and going somewhere else and having success. It's a tough place to coach. It's a tough place because of the expectations. It was interesting. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day about, would you rather have the Ole Miss job or the Alabama job? At Ole Miss, you're not expected to win a championship, and you can go 7-5 and keep your job. At Alabama, you can't do that. But at Alabama, you got a greater chance to win a championship. There's inherently more pressure at Alabama to win at a high level. So you can be more secure at Ole Miss with the lower ceiling, or have a lot more scrutiny at Alabama with a higher ceiling. What do you want?
True. And I think we all would agree with this, that maybe this is a poll question, but from Lane Kiffin's perspective, the choices of co-eds are much better in Oxford. Now, Jimmy, that could be because of lack of dental care in the state of Alabama. I don't know.
Oh.
I'm not pretending to know. But if you're basing it off co-ed selection, you got to go Oxford.
Well, if you're basing it on that, Kiffin may take the Florida job.
That is true.
True.
So, just curious.
If it becomes open.
So, I wanted to ask you guys, like, what does that say? Because you guys are talking about, like, I'm bringing on the following alleged, and Jimmy, I get your point on Bob Devaney to Tom Osborne, the only one, but then what does that say about, like, Miami as a program in the 80s where they had Howard Schnellenberger and won it, and then they hired Jimmy Johnson and won one, and then they hired Dennis Erickson and won two? Was that them making good hires, or were they just lucky because it was such an elite program and anybody could have found the talent down there during that time?
Well, they became an elite program. Was that the right succession? Wasn't Butch Davis in there somewhere?
Butch Davis was after Dennis Harrison and built a team that Larry Cooper won a national title with. So,
yeah, their program was elite. They had so many great players. There were people that wanted to go there. They had an attitude about that program that allowed them to sustain success like hardly anybody else has done. I mean, isn't it hard to name other places that did that?
Yeah, my thoughts on that are this, is not all the games were televised, and Schnellenberger and then Jimmy Johnson sold families on you can see your young man play, whereas nowadays every game's televised, so that's not as much of a recruiting advantage. And I had one coach tell me that there are more elite athletes in that 3-county area around Dade than anywhere else in the nation, and I believe that to be true. I think second's probably Louisiana, and then maybe Texas, somewhere else. But as far as per capita, I think that it was lack of television exposure really that allowed Miami to keep all those guys in house.
I hadn't thought about that. I do remember when Mark Richt went to Miami, he said that there are so many great players that they got rated a 3-star he said in most other places they'd be rated a 4-star, maybe even a 5-star, because you can't give a whole bunch of 4 and 5-star players to too many people in an area. So I thought that was kind of an interesting way to put it. In other words, there's great talent in that area, Dave, as you're suggesting. I do remember when Nick Saban went to LSU that the state of Louisiana per capita produced more NFL players than any other state.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true anymore, but at that time, it was true. And, oh, by the way, they still produce a ton of players per capita that go to the NFL. And if you keep those players in Louisiana, LSU is hard to beat.
Well, I've maintained that LSU is the easiest job in America.
Easiest?
Yeah, the easiest. And by the way, Les Miles and Ed Orgeron winning championships there proves my point.
Well, that's why Brian Kelly went there. I think he said if those guys can win a championship, I ought to be able to win one.
Les Miles looks like he bumped his head on something, and then Ed Orgeron just looks like he just drank something. All right, Jimmy, your appearance brought to you by Varner Ford. You had a fantastic interview with Jeff Francis, and again, I love what you're doing every Sunday morning. I absolutely love that show, Sunday Sports Sound Off, and you get up early after writing a column. This is retirement for Jimmy. He is just an absolute dog when it comes to working, and we appreciate all you do.
Dave, I appreciate it. And I've had Tim Irwin and I've been doing that show since the early 2000s. I think we started in 2002. He took about 5 years off because his son was at Duke. And then our most recent podcast with Jeff Francis, there are some really funny stories in that one. So hopefully folks will have a chance to go listen to it. You can find it on YouTube. If you have any trouble searching it under full disclosure, you can go to YouTube, search my name, and you can find all the interviews we have done with area. Most of them are former Tennessee stars in some fashion, but you can find most of those interviews there.